Shadow Hack. Chapter 591, The Fall of Sword Sage. Standing above the wall of Lucky Wind City, Li Yunmu was holding a large tangerine in his hand and was concentrating on peeling its skin. From the time when the spy left Lucky Wind City, it had been full 5 days. Even if the man had flown all the way instead of using teleport channels, he still would have been able to deliver Li Yunmu's words to the supreme transcending experts. After swallowing the pulp, Li Yunmu helplessly shook his head and commanded, "Immediately close all teleport channels in Lucky Wind City, regardless of whether incoming or outgoing. Decline all requests." "Yes." Blade Overlord nodded and cupped his hands toward Li Yunmu before quickly leaving the city wall. Since Li Yunmu was the only descender who had returned from the origin world, then even if he didn't have the method to break into deity realm, the supreme transcending experts wouldn't let him off. Not to mention that he had displayed tyrannical strength. Since the 4 transcending experts hadn't rushed to Lucky Wind City as soon as they heard his words, it was certain that they had returned to their territories to gather people. A huge battle was about to begin. Whoosh! Whoosh! A light breeze occasionally blew past the city wall, but Li Yunmu felt like it had become much more ferocious. He narrowed his eyes and saw a lanky figure far in the distance. It was wearing a grey robe and was flying on a sharp iron sword, so if it wasn't one of the supreme transcending experts, Sword Sage, to be exact, who else could it be? Odd, Sword Sage is Sword Sage, so why? Li Yunmu's bewildered gaze fell upon Sword Sage's body. He could sense the tyrannical flux energy in the man's body and the armor formed of sword intent floating around him. Its dominating manner almost caused Li Yunmu's great Sun Thunder Tyrant muscle marrow secrets to appear on their own, as if to battle against the enemy. Although everything seemed normal, Li Yunmu was extremely astonished. He couldn't sense the slightest hint of vitality from the newcomer's body. The Sword Sage who was coming closer to Lucky Wind City seemed to be a walking corpse. As soon as this thought rose in Li Yunmu's mind, a bitter smile appeared on his face. What sort of existence was Sword Sage? He was a supreme transcending expert, so if he wanted to escape, then even Battle God would find it difficult to stop him. How could anyone turn this sort of existence into a walking corpse? Not to mention that when Sword Sage was in Heavenly Cloud City, there were 3 other supreme transcending experts with him. Given the scale of the powers gathered, only a couple existences on par with Zhang Zion who could possibly eliminate 2 of the supreme transcending experts. When riding on the sword, Sword Sage was much faster than Li Yunmu when he only relied on his physical strength. Within a few breaths, Sword Sage reached the vicinity of Lucky Wind City. What a joke! Li Yunmu looked at the figure wearing plain clothes in front of the city wall in shock, and his complexion turned gloomier with each passing second. He took note of the once clear eyes, torn clothes, and the metal blade which Sword Sage treated as his life on the verge of fracturing. Previously, it was still possible that Li Yunmu had sensed wrong given the distance, but now, so close up, it was impossible for him to sense wrong. There indeed wasn't the slightest bit of vitality in Sword Sage's body. His flesh, which seemed to have come to finish some affairs, was indeed a walking corpse. The positions of Earth's 6 supreme transcending experts weren't fixed. They were simply the 6 most powerful existences whose ranks Sword Sage had only recently joined. But now, soon after Frontline Heaven's frontline god lost his life, this supreme transcending expert also perished. When Sword Sage saw Li Yunmu, it was as if he was freed from a heavy burden. He lightly flicked his right hand, and a thin silhouette turned into a ray of light that shot toward Li Yunmu. He caught it with his hand. After the ray of light lost all kinetic energy and regained its original appearance, Li Yunmu's complexion became even more gloomy. The person before him wasn't a stranger, but someone who he was rather familiar with. It was Heavenly Cloud City's City Lord, Lin Yuero. It was impossible for the person who kept watch over the Heavenly Cloud City to appear here. Moreover, many people knew that behind Lin Yuero, there was a person making waves those days, Li Yunmu. Thus, few people would dare to have malicious designs on her and Heavenly Cloud City. But her sudden appearance informed Li Yunmu that Heavenly Cloud City had fallen. Now, you must be a little careful. Sword Sage smiled faintly. Although his ash-colored face without any blood looked extremely sinister, a warm current rushed through Li Yunmu's heart. After delivering Lin Yuero, the final bit of power supporting Sword Sage's body dispersed. The next instant, this existence which had walked tall in the world for a long time, stood upright among the top people of Earth, and was considered as the #1 master of sword turned into dust in front of Li Yunmu's eyes. Whoosh! 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 3 enormous light beams rushed into the sky, and countless black dots which represented Fluxor slowly appeared in Li Yunmu's vision. The instant Sword Sage told him to be careful, Li Yunmu knew that the people who had attacked weren't strangers, but rather the supreme transcending experts of the 55th Earth. Li Yunmu had thought that war was about to break out, but he hadn't expected that the opponent would strike so quick. But after some thought he realized that they were only afraid of his power which obliterated God Undercurrent, so how could they give him time to prepare? However, Li Yunmu couldn't burst forth with the power that had exterminated God Undercurrent. First, he didn't trust system enough, and second, even if he was willing to allow the system to take control of his body, the extremely weakened system wouldn't be able to accomplish it. When he thought of it, Li Yunmu couldn't help but feel somewhat sorrowful. Originally, the Flux ancestor had reincarnated as Tower of Glory to absorb the energy of fallen Fluxors. But when the passage to descend to the origin world was opened, every single one of the quasi-deities had bared their fangs. Apart from uniting to face the great calamity in front of humanity, those people had no virtuous traits. Each one of them wanted to grasp the benefits in their hand and only viewed others as chess pieces which could be discarded at any time. And this sort of people had joined together to sit at the top of the earth? If you want war, I will give it to you. Li Yunmu slowly closed his eyes and said one word at a time, you chose to start this battle, but you won't be able to end it. Since you chose to be my enemies, let me bestow you with your deaths. Chapter 592, The Three Powers Arrive. Battle God and Blade Master led a number of quasi-deities into Li Yunmu's line of sight. Battle God was clad in black iron barbarian lion armor and had a purple crown on his head with a cape as scarlet as blood tied at his back. In his thick and broad right hand, there was a crescent moon halberd emitting cold rays of light when illuminated by the sunlight. If he hadn't been standing in the air, but had been sitting on top of a warhorse, he would have been able to pass as a general from the era of cold weapons before the Dark Age. Compared to Battle God's splendid attire, Blade Master's clothes were much more casual. He wore only shorts while his upper body was naked. Several runes painted with white grease covered his body. They were the blade runes of Blood-E-Wood, and reportedly they were enchantments to make the blade intent more formidable. Apart from these two supreme transcending experts, there were many other quasi-deities, but none of them could make Li Yunmu feel suppressed. There's still another one. I wonder who? Li Yunmu squinted into the distance and unleashed his senses to their limit to find the third presence which could threaten him among the countless cultivators who had come to attack Lucky Wind City. The system chose that moment to open its mouth. The third presence belongs to Battle Sage Vega, you don't need to find her. When you all will be busy fighting, she will reveal herself. Battle Sage Vega? Hearing the third name, Li Yunmu almost began to laugh involuntarily. He truly couldn't understand how he had offended this female battle sage, who was the protector of Central Continent, while he was away from Earth. Soon after he returned, she had made the decision to use him as bait to pull God Undercurrent into revealing some flaws during the battle in the 7th dimension. And now she had joined the group plotting against him and even allowed the majority of the upper echelons as well as elites of Vega Temple to participate in battle. Regardless of whatever was said, he should be considered as Vega Temple's subordinate, so how was it appropriate for her to collude with others to capture him? War? Li Yunmu didn't feel the least bit of fear regarding this word. After all, he still had the 23 shadows who had transformed into humans standing guard over Lucky Wind City. What sort of existence could attack a city which had 24 supreme transcending experts, including Li Yunmu, guarding it? There was also the problem of the present Lucky Wind City having several spell formations arranged around it based on the system's deductions, allowing its defenses to attain the level of a transcending power's main base. It could said that apart from one weak area, Lucky Wind City could be considered as formidable as the so-called incomparable transcending powers. Everyone, why have you all come? Li Yunmu pressed his right hand at his dantian and roared at the people who were quickly closing upon him while using his flux energy. His voice numbed the bodies of the weaker fluxers and beasts on the enemy side, and they almost fell down. Li Yunmu, we suspect that you have already betrayed humanity, otherwise, how could you explain the massacre of so many humans after returning to Earth? Battle God stated calmly. If Li Yunmu's voice was like a thunderclap for the allied forces, Battle God's voice was like a shot in their arm. The fluxers whose legs had almost went soft because of Li Yunmu's voice gradually recovered their morale under the influence of Battle God's voice and restored the marching sequence. The sneer on Li Yunmu's face became even more pronounced. People who believed themselves to be infallible would naturally directly declare in front of everyone that they had come for the method to step into deity realm. If they had genuinely wanted to hold Li Yunmu responsible for slaughtering the fluxers of other powers, he probably wouldn't have been able to return alive from the impregnable pass in the 7th dimension. Naturally, there was another element behind Battle God choosing this reasoning. The Big Hots who formed the top level of the power pyramid felt that Li Yunmu had already broken out of their control. Their desire to rule was intense, however, so they wanted to beat Li Yunmu. The aim of their expedition wasn't to kill him, but to remind him who was in control. Because I felt Li Yunmu raised the corners of his mouth and stated, Lucky Wind City had become too filthy so I had to clean it up. This sentence was slightly venomous. After all, it could be interpreted as him comparing the fluxers of other transcending powers to garbage. Too arrogant. This youngster was being too arrogant. All three enemy powers were enraged by Li Yunmu's words. I am not targeting anyone, but rather saying that all of you are garbage. Li Yunmu had chosen to launch another strike. I want to ask something, do any of your three dare to face me independently? Battle God's complexion suddenly became gloomy, and he bellowed in a low voice, Li Yunmu, your death is at hand, and you still dare to boast shamelessly? Don't tell me that you think you can fight us all by yourself? I advise you to tie your own hands and obediently wait for our investigation to finish. Boom! Before even finishing his speech, he heavily stomped in the air, and his body turned into a ray of light that rushed straight at Li Yunmu. Battle God had once exchanged a blow with Li Yunmu. If the youth was the same as in the 7th dimension and had the confidence in his strength, he wouldn't care about how many people were in front of him or who they were. Perhaps as soon as Blade Master and Battle God appeared, he would have attacked. When confronted with an existence that would never take the initiative to give up the authority, Li Yunmu's attitude reflected weakness. This allowed Battle God, whose mind was previously in chaos, to breathe a sigh of relief, and he took the initiative to attack Li Yunmu. Li Yunmu lightly touched his nose with his right hand and narrowed his eyes to the point they formed crescent moons. He then spoke while enunciating each word. Who told you that I am alone? Before he was even finished, his 23 shadows who had taken human persona rose into the air. Their terrifying might was on the verge of materializing into matter and forcibly interrupted Battle God's courageous charge. 23 supreme transcending experts. Battle God stopped using the tips of his feet in the air and even panicked for an instant while holding the crescent moon halberd. He wasn't clear about where Li Yunmu could have found such formidable helpers. After all, the 20 human figures with mysterious origin were on the level as Sword Sage in terms of combat strength and weren't too inferior to the three of them. But the three supreme transcending experts still couldn't match the number of the people on Li Yunmu's side in terms of numbers. Even if the three powers managed to occupy Lucky Wind City, their strength would be greatly diminished. In truth, even a complete wipeout was a possibility. Continue what? Li Yunmu's eyes flickered coldly. Why stop? Come attack me. Chapter 593, I also have allies. Battle? Is this entertaining? An incomparably thick voice echoed from far away, which instantly dissipated the killing intent coming from Battle God. With a majestic presence, Zhang Zion came from the same direction as the last time. He was slowly strolling towards them without any nervousness or excitement, as if whether it was Battle God or anyone else, all of them were fowls and chickens in his eyes. You seem quite interesting. I will be your opponent. Zhang Zion pointed towards Blade Master with a faint smile on his face. As an expert infatuated with combat, Zhang Zion took great pleasure in battling all sorts of experts. At that instant, Blade Master, who had been standing silently on one side without saying anything, had surprisingly become the target of his interest. Another supreme transcending expert. The three supreme transcending experts who had led everyone over were startled. They had never expected that Li Yunmia would have so many helpers, even if the 23 supreme transcending experts weren't formidable and actually weren't much different from ordinary quasi-deities in the eyes of Battle God. But this existence, which had appeared out of nowhere and asked to fight Blade Master, had strands of energy fluctuations coming out of his body. They were strong enough for fear to grip everyone's hearts. Even Blade Master, with his body covered in blade runes and standing in his best form, had the sensation that his blade couldn't cut through the opponent standing in front of him. It has to be known that even when facing God Undercurrent, who hadn't completely recovered at that time, Blade Master had never had such a strange sensation. As a cultivator of the domineering blade path, how could he feel that he would lose without even battle? This was the biggest joke in the world. Regardless of what the Blade Master was thinking, the fact was clear just by looking at Zhang Zion. He felt his own powerlessness. Fortunately, we still have a trump card. As long as we can quickly end this battle, then. Blade Master lowered his head and secretly glanced at the multitudes of people underneath. At that instant, Battle Sage Vega was hidden in the sea of people. Even someone as formidable as Battle God had no method to find her, so what could be said about Li Yunmia, whose foundation as well as strength were quite inferior to theirs? As long as Battle Sage Vega could quietly get close to Li Yunmia, or perhaps that mysterious expert, and unleash her most powerful technique, fixing the tone with a single hammer blow, she would instantly end this battle. While Blade Master's head was filled his petty calculations, a strange fluctuation spread through the surrounding space. Shortly after, a casual voice echoed in the air and instantly smashed through all the schemes in Blade Master's mind. Your distinguished self Li Yunmia is the friend of our Fox clan, so your enemies are also our enemies. A black ancient castle which belonged to the medieval period of Earth slowly appeared in everyone's sight. The blonde-haired Dennis was standing at the gate with his face full of killing intent. There were 11 battle angel level existences behind him. Seems like your harvest during the past few days wasn't bad. Your allies, Battle God said, seemingly abandoning all thoughts of attacking. Noisy. Dennis flicked his golden hair back and gloomily said, as the Battle God of the 50-50 Earth, you're quite famous, but now that we meet, I see that you're surprisingly such an overly cautious existence. While speaking, Dennis raised his hand, and his pale white fingertips broke through countless invisible threads and pointed toward Battle Sage Vega, who was mixed among the ordinary fluxers. He set her apart from the countless human figures. Vampires were quite sensitive toward the presence of food, especially the formidable ones who were in the mood for feasting. Even if Battle Sage Vega stayed quietly in the sea of people without making any movement, she was quite eye-catching to the vampires. Then you are my prey. Dennis licked his lips and laughed evilly. Your blood would certainly be very delicious. Battle Sage Vega, who had been hidden among multitudes of people, felt her body shake from top to bottom. She didn't dare to raise her head and look at Dennis standing above the towering ancient castle. When she had transformed into two and assumed the identities of Battle Sage Vega and Battle Sage and Jing, even the most powerful people like Battle God, Barbarian Kings, or the others who occupied the top of the power pyramid hadn't been able to see through her diversion. Thus, She hadn't expected that on that day she would be seen through by some expert of unknown origin. After the three transcending powers arrived at Lucky Wind City, in a few moments, these people who could order Li Yunmu around whenever they willed at one time discovered that this chess piece had matured far beyond that time. As a matter of fact, the power under his control was sufficient to make them feel threatened. The most terrifying fact, however, was that the three supreme transcending experts had used the fastest speed to assemble their armies and march on Lucky Wind City. They hadn't even waited for their subordinate powers to return to their headquarters and gather their elites. This was why they hadn't expected that Li Yunmu would put up such a stand so quickly, even inviting such terrifying helpers. The three supreme transcending experts hadn't even attacked and two of them were already restrained by Li Yunmu's helpers. In no time, the scales of victory had already tilted toward Li Yunmu's side. Looking at the ashen complexion of the three supreme transcending experts, Li Yunmu clasped his hands behind his back and indifferently said, "You see, I said long ago that I won't be battling alone. I also have allies. It's not like only big hots like you can have them." Bang! Battle God slightly stretched his body, and the sound of explosion echoed from his entire body. Whoosh! Crescent Moon halberd slightly shook, and a layer of strange energy fluctuations instantly rippled. With the sharp tip of the halberd pointed toward Li Yunmu, Battle God stretched his neck right and left before calmly saying, "Li Yunmu, last time in the 7th dimension, when you exchanged blows with me, it wasn't anything more than warm-up. What do you say, should we complete that battle today?" A green light rushed out of the heavenly world, and the next instant, Li Yunmu was already holding a blade with a dragon head on the handle. With a faint smile, he said, "Good. Only because of life and death battles had Battle God been able to reach the height at which he resided." At that moment then, all the schemes and plots vanished from his mind, and only the instinct to battle existed in their place. Chapter 594, Cannot Exist Under the Same Sky. 1 step. 2 steps. 3 steps. 8 steps. Li Yunmu didn't have the intention to let Battle God take the initiative. He instantly unleashed Chao Tian 8 steps, an explosive power born from his terrifying physical body wrapped around the dragon-headed blade. Battle God hadn't become famous just because of his monstrous talent, but because of his combat prowess to which not even the Fluxers on the same level as him could compare. Even without his Battle Barbarian Supreme Battlesuit, his position as the most powerful person of Earth was secure. Both Blade Master and Sword Sage might not have minded getting entangled with him for a time, but if they thought to win against him, that would be just lunatics' ravings. Clang! The sound of collision echoed in the area when a cyan dragon-headed blade met with a crescent moon halberd. Terrifying energy fluctuations spread from around Battle God and Li Yunmu in all directions. The space in their surroundings began to distort, making the scene appear extremely strange. In reality, space wasn't some sort of stable energy. As long as a certain amount of power was unleashed, it could easily be distorted. Quasi-deity level experts could even rip apart space tunnels and travel through the void. Battle God had only raised his weapon to counter Li Yunmu's attack when the space in the surrounding 100 meters distorted. The power of the collision was simply unfathomable. Ah! Battle God roared and swept the crescent moon halberd in his hand to push away the dragon-headed blade. Although Battle God had guessed long ago that Li Yunmu's strength had reached a high point and wasn't much inferior to his own, it had been a guess and nothing more. That was why when he had confronted Li Yunmu in the 7th dimension, he had only had the intention of playing around. As soon as their goals conflicted, however, Battle God came to seriously battle Li Yunmu. Only then did he realize that this chess piece which he could have killed 1,000 times in the past surprisingly possessed the strength which wasn't one whit inferior to his own. Interesting, but don't tell me that of all the descenders, only you with the most ordinary background managed to survive. As the figure holding the crescent moon halberd retreated 2 steps, his hand reached behind his back to take hold its red cape. Li Yunmu, you truly have concealed yourself very well, but unfortunately, you encountered me. Now die for me with your secrets. Battle God stated while licking his lips. He was an arrogant person, and the one known as Battle God in this world. When he, who was unrivaled on the same level, encountered someone just as unrivaled, like Li Yunmu, there was no chance for coexistence between they. They were both extremely ruthless people. When their blades collided, Battle God had already given up on all intentions of existing together with Li Yunmu under the same sky. His main goal right then became to kill the youth before him, other matters would only come after that. Although there was not a high chance, the other descenders might still return. In the worst possible scenario, all the descenders had perished and no one would return successfully with the method to reach the deity realm. If that was really the case, they could live in their current state and nurture another group of descenders to wait for the next opportunity. With the crescent moon halberd in his hand, Battle God stood in the air as his scarlet cape flapped violently in the wind. A moment later, he burst forth with his top speed. His footwork technique did not lose to Chao Tian 8 steps in the slightest and allowed him to disappear from Li Yunmu's awareness. With the space distorting in his surroundings, Li Yunmu didn't dare to casually unleash his flawless awareness. It was unknown whether his perception could penetrate the unstable spatial positions, but even if it did, who knew what sort of world would it go through and who it might end up provoking. One matter was almost certain to happen, however. If the distorted space was to suddenly close, the awareness which had penetrated through it would be eternally severed from Li Yunmu. This could then be classified as an injury of the soul and mind, which couldn't be healed just by cultivating the tyrannical flesh. You taking the initiative to attack? Good, 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 this will be interesting. Li Yunmu tightly gripped the hilt of the cyan dragon-headed blade. His pair of crystal-clear eyes surveyed his surroundings, and he unleashed his 5 senses to the max. After the strength of his flesh had reached a new peak, if Battle God could still disappear from his vision because of extremely fast movement, his speed would be too terrifying. Central Continent's Battle God wasn't famed for his speed. A red light, which was the color of blood, suddenly exploded from the hands of Zhang Zion who had been trading blows with Blade Master. The next instant, Zhang Zion threw a punch which landed directly on Blade Master's chest. Blade Master coughed out a mouthful of blood as he blown away by the attack. If one absolutely insisted on asking for analogy, then Blade Master could be compared to an ordinary person from before the Dark Age who had been punched by a furious brown bear. He felt as if all the bones in his body had broken. That's all. Zhang Zion narrowed his eyes. He didn't seem to have any intention of chasing after his enemy and claiming full victory. As someone with rich combat experience, Zhang Zion naturally knew that he was more formidable than Blade Master, but only a little. If it was said that he could seriously injure Blade Master with a punch at full strength, it could be possible. But if it was said that he could make Blade Master lose all combat capability with one punch, then he himself wouldn't believe it. Hegemon Blade, 1 instant 1,000 years. Blade Master, who had been flying away, suddenly bellowed. His left hand trembled slightly before throwing a long black object shrouded in fog. Danger! Extreme danger! Zhang Zion's battle instincts violently screamed at him in warning. As the long black object neared him, he saw that it surprisingly was an extremely unusually looking long blade. The instant it closed in on Zhang Zion, it exploded into countless cold lights which could cause anyone's heart to palpitate. In an instant, they formed a prison of blades sealing Zhang Zion inside. Blade Master coughed out another mouthful of blood. The flux energy in his body trembled slightly, and he forcefully stopped himself. He then sat down cross-legged in midair with the help of flux energy and used his thoughts to operate the blade prison. Chapter 595, Absolute Defense. Pang! Suddenly, Li Yunmu, who was trying to find the tracks of Battle God, felt a wave of ineffable power burst forth from his body. It was extremely unfamiliar to him and wasn't related to any of the cultivation methods he cultivated. Even the most recently obtained fiend origin was far from being comparable to this energy in terms of strength. Instantly, Li Yunmu felt his flux energy strength swell greatly. If it was said that previously Li Yunmu's flux energy strength could match late-sage flux experts, then presently, he possessed the power of half a step in deity realm, which was unrivaled. That blade! Obtain it! You must obtain it! The anxious system in Li Yunmu's mind sounded like a man who had eaten an aphrodisiac and noticed a beautiful woman. Although the system no longer intended to continue pretending to have an indifferent attitude in front of Li Yunmu, it had never shown such huge fluctuation in its mood. It even took the initiative to pour its own power into him to increase his strength temporarily. The blade taken out by the blade master had instantly trapped a powerful existence like Zhang Zion, so it was naturally far from ordinary. But Li Yunmu's evaluation of that blade's worth was only so-so. Now that he had little Qing, it could be said that he possessed a walking armory. Moreover, it would mature with time. As long as little Qing became more formidable, the weapons it would morph into would also become more powerful. Therefore, although Li Yunmu gasped in surprise over the power of the black blade, it didn't arouse any interest in him. But upon noticing the system's anxious attitude, he could make a rough guess about its origins. After all, although he had obtained many items manufactured in the Dark Age, few of them had obtained a high assessment from the system. A black blade type weapon which wasn't the main weapon of Blade Master yet could cause the system to become excited to this degree could only have one origin: the time before the Dark Age. Regarding the civilization before the Dark Age, the majority of people weren't clear about it, let alone someone like Li Yunmu. After all, the many civilizations of that era weren't connected to each other, so their inheritances hadn't survived. Although humanity's growth hadn't decreased, the civilizations of that era had almost completely vanished. For instance, the civilization which was closest to the Dark Age had reached the peak in science and technology. Relying on all sorts of advanced instruments and machines, humans could overcome the inconveniences of the innate limitations of their body and complete all sorts of unfathomable feats. But the technological civilization had no knowledge about the previous cold weapons civilization. The inheritances of almost all the famed martial arts were lost, with only a few remaining in some novels. Before the cold weapons civilization was the Bronze Civilization, Stone Age, and even the ancient cultivation, which was mostly a myth. Moreover, all sorts of things found by the science and technology civilization only proved that the legend was just that, a legend. But if the cultivation civilization was only a legend, how did people like Li Yunmu, who could walk in the air, move mountains, and turn the oceans, do this as well as all sorts of other strange things? Yet if in the future the civilization again focused on science and technology civilization, wouldn't everything change again? People like Li Yunmu, who were made of blood and flesh, would become known as characters fabricated in the legends. Li Yunmu's brows jumped lightly, and he turned around. Battle God had surprisingly managed to reach his back, and the crescent moon halberd in his hand, which was continuously receiving his flux energy, had stored enough for its next attack. But in reality, Battle God's luck on that day couldn't be considered good. If it was before Li Yunmu had received the system's energy, he would have only been able to respond the instant when Battle God attacked. But after receiving the system's energy, he discovered Battle God when he was only halfway through getting close. Ha! Battle God bellowed, and without the slightest hesitation, he thrusted the crescent moon halberd in his hand. His rich combat experience told him that even if Li Yunmu was confident in his defense, he would still have to clench his teeth to resist such a strike. Furthermore, since he had already been discovered, he definitely couldn't stay in one place. He could gamble and hope that Li Yunmu planned to receive his strike and so continue storing the energy in his crescent moon halberd until he was sure that he could insta-kill Li Yunmu. But by that time, Li Yunmu might have already fled far into the distance. Therefore, Battle God didn't choose to gamble. The instant Li Yunmu turned around, the crescent moon halberd ruthlessly struck toward him. Terrifying flux energy congealed at the tip and quickly rushed towards Li Yunmu's chest. Although the thrust didn't contain Battle God's full strength, it had sufficient power to kill Li Yunmu, so he didn't dare to take it directly with his body. The cyan-colored heavenly flames ignited over his whole body as the Azure Dragon expert armor covered him. When Battle God noticed that Li Yunmu didn't intend to evade, a sneer appeared on his face, and he coldly said, "If you only have this little bit of strength, you will die here. Just by relying on the Azure Dragon deity suit, you cannot resist my attack, or else I wouldn't be worthy of my name, Battle God." Had. A disdainful laugh came from Li Yunmu's mouth. Soon after, the flux energy in his body congealed into a golden bell which sometimes appeared see-through and sometimes took material form. A golden dragon which seemingly couldn't contain its rage was wandering within it, apparently wanting to break the golden bell restricting it. When Li Yunmu used Azure Dragon Expert Armor, the new property born from Admiralty Cover, Perfect Defense, was also instantly unleashed. Terrifying pressure rushed from his body to oppress Battle God, and for an instant, an illusion of Li Yunmu using a butcher blade to slaughter chickens could be seen. The tip of the halberd pushed through the golden bell, able to penetrate it slightly, but then Battle God discovered that his crescent moon halberd was unable to go farther. Without any other option, he could only put on a bold face and explode the energy congealed at the tip of the blade. Terrifying flux energy exploded forth, but it wasn't able to injure Li Yunmu. Even the illusionary golden bell didn't dissipate. This was because before Battle God's energy had completely unleashed, the golden dragon had pounced on it and devoured it. Chapter 596, Blade Master's Blade. When he saw the constantly moving golden dragon in the golden bell which appeared to have devoured something delicious, Battle God felt like he had gone stupid. As the master of the War God Shrine of the Central Continent and as one of the 6 supreme transcending masters who wasn't shaken even by thunder, he had seen countless opponents and cultivation methods. Yet he had never seen a defense cultivation method which was as strange and as monstrous as the one which Li Yunmu cultivated. Even with 40% of power from a peak quasi-deity level expert, the golden bell could only be slightly penetrated. Battle God wasn't so stupid as to believe that Li Yunmu was only a greenhorn with an outstanding cultivation method. Since he was a person who had returned from the origin world, it could be said that the strength of his flesh would be unmatchable from that alone, let alone now that he had reinforced it with Azure Dragon Expert Armor. Ahuhu! A high-pitched dragon's roar suddenly rose from Li Yunmu's cyan dragon-headed blade. The next instant, he raised the weapon with both hands and sent out golden blade energies. There were so many of them they filled up Battle God's whole field of vision. Given his level, however, he could naturally ignore the gaudy blade energies and instantly discern which was the truly dangerous one. It wasn't unexpected that the 5-clawed divine dragon was spiraling around it. Although it didn't add to the offense of the energy attack, Battle God had just faced it when he traded blows with Li Yunmu. From it, he well understood how the golden dragon transformed the blade energy attack into one that was extremely hard to defend against. Only when Li Yunmu sliced down with his blade did Battle God completely understand the meaning behind the youth's previous sneer. At that moment, he realized that he was mistaken when he thought that Li Yunmu had taken out Azure Dragon Supreme Battlesuit to resist his 40% power attack. The truth was very far away from that. Li Yunmu hadn't cared about his attack and had summoned Azure Dragon Supreme Battlesuit only to reinforce his own power and launch his counterattack. Battle God's terror stemmed from the fact that because of his previous attack, 40% of his strength had been lost, and he was still in the process of recovering it. In addition to the fact that he couldn't stop Li Yunmu from summoning Azure Dragon Deity Battlesuit, it could be said that the initiative of the battle was all in Li Yunmu's hands. He had to resist just one strike. Just one attack and nothing more? You look down on me too much. Battle God narrowed his eyes and lifted the crescent moon halberd. Inexhaustible flux energy like a powerful tsunami then rushed toward the golden dragon blade attack unleashed by Li Yunmu. Boom! When the golden dragon blade energy and the powerful tide of flux energy collided, an enormous explosion occurred. Yet in a single breath's time, the powerful current of flux energy coming from Battle God was obliterated by Li Yunmu's golden dragon blade. The next second, that blade energy slammed heavily against Battle God's body. He circulated his flux energy to try and resist the terrifying momentum of the attack as bitterness appeared on his face. When Li Yunmu had descended to the origin world with the assistance of Battle Sage Vega, he hadn't been weak, but he had been nothing more than an ant in the eyes of Battle God. Then, in the 7th dimension, he might have stunned Battle God, but he hadn't been worthy of taking a full-strength attack. Now that they had met again after Li Yunmu had barely recuperated from his injuries, Battle God was unable to wait to kill his way through Lucky Wind City. The potential of the figure silently attacking him from up in the air was extremely formidable. Even if Battle God hadn't said anything, he had still been somewhat terrified in his heart. He was afraid that if he gave Li Yunmu more time, the youth would become so strong that they could no longer stand on the same level. But he hadn't expected that when they met again, he would surprisingly be unable to do anything about Li Yunmu's blade energy while the youth would easily resist an attack with close to 40% of his power. But outside of anyone's expectations, when Li Yunmu's blade energy struck Battle God, he didn't feel any pain of being torn apart. He only felt like someone had heavily kicked his stomach. Although a wave of pain rushed through his stomach, he didn't sustain any serious injuries. He was simply sent flying by the terrifying force of impact. Li Yunmu, who was clad in Azure Dragon Supreme battlesuit, had used a full-strength attack in order to force him to retreat. Once this thought appeared in Battle God's mind, his pair of black and white eyes suddenly narrowed. He then understood that from the beginning, he hadn't been Li Yunmu's target. Sure enough, Li Yunmu rushed forward with extreme speed in the direction of Zhang Zion's location. "Get lost!" he roared violently. The terrifying sound waves filled with flux energy and fiendish energy almost caused the space to distort. 20-something battle sages who were trying to obstruct Li Yunmu's path were forced to retreat. All of them spit out arrows of blood. With the system reinforcing Li Yunmu, his roar's might was this terrifying. His aim was to rescue Zhang Zion who had been fighting against Blade Master. However, at this moment, the latter was empty. Zhang Zion's combat strength was extremely terrifying, so Blade Master had used his most formidable deadly move. It was the mysterious weapon which was considered as a must-acquire by the system. Yet even people like Battle God didn't have means to take it. At that moment, even Zhang Zion who could slaughter Blade Master if he broke through the Blade's blockade, let alone Li Yunmu. Blade Master right then was no different from a fowl or a chicken. Even with Li Yunmu's intentions being crystal clear, the troops led by the 3 supreme transcending experts felt a wave of powerlessness wash over their bodies. After all, Li Yunmu's one roar had forced the 20-something battle sages to retreat. Of the people present on the scene, probably only Battle Sage Vega could stop him. However, her condition wasn't very good. Although Dennis didn't have any means to endanger her life, his terrifying speed and regeneration gave her no time to catch her breath. She was forced into a high-speed combat. Battle God was too far away and Battle Sage Vega was powerless to help, so who could provide assistance? System, how should I collect that blade? The corners of Li Yunmu's mouth were raised slightly as if the general picture was already clear. In the reality, the outcome could easily be guessed. At the very least, Li Yunmu didn't think that anyone could stop him after the reinforcement of the system. Even if God Undercurrent was resurrected, Li Yunmu would have the guts to fight him. Naturally, whether he won or not, that couldn't be said. Use hands, what else? I have exhausted all my strength, so what comes next depends on you, the system answered in a somewhat tired voice. After an instant though, it dropped another heavy bomb in his mind. If I can successfully devour that black blade, it will be extremely beneficial for both you and me. Moreover, I will also give you a chance to obtain the great devouring technique. Chapter 597, and Jing appears. Li Yunmu focused on the blade curtain formed after the black blade had split up and subconsciously massaged his neck. Zhang Zion, who was an existence whose body couldn't hold in his formidable power. His flesh was probably not inferior to that of Li Yunmu without Azure Dragon Expert Armor's reinforcement. Yet if he was able to forcibly rush past the blade curtain by relying on his tyrannical flesh, he would have done that a long time ago. When faced with such a terrifying power, Li Yunmyo considered the system's words to use his hands as a harmless joke. After pondering over it for a moment, he shifted his gaze to Blade Master and sneered. Blade Master, your methods are quite troublesome, but while distracted by controlling this blade curtain, I wonder how many strikes of mine can you endure? After hearing Li Yunmyo's sinister words, Blade Master, who had been focused on controlling the blade curtain, almost jumped out of his skin and began to curse. Whether for good or bad, you are an expert who could force Battle God to retreat, and now you want to attack a person who doesn't have the power to retaliate. Do you still have any care for your face? And Jing. Stop this youngster. While trading blows with Dennis, Battle Sage Vega clenched her teeth and summoned her other persona Battle Sage and Jing. The senior who had previously appeared as someone from the hidden Li sect showed up at that moment, and everyone caught their breath. Even Blade Master and Battle God turned to Battle Sage Vega with incredulity in their eyes. For the first time, the protector of the central continent and a person with neither desire nor greed had revealed her trump card in front of everyone. The number of supreme transcending experts had increased by 1. The Fluxers of the three factions couldn't help but raise their brows in joy, thinking in their hearts, Li Yunmyo, a youngster like you wanted to fight against 2 experts, so see how easily is your wish fulfilled. The summoning of Battle Sage and Jing had yet to complete when Battle Sage Vega closed and then opened her lily-white hands. 2 sickle-type weapons immediately appeared within them. With this, she revealed her trump card to contend for supremacy with other supreme transcending experts. Li Yunmyo raised his eyebrows in disdain and said with a gloomy expression, Battle Sage and Jing, you won't be able to stop me. I don't think that with your strength, you can stop the 23 existences whose strength is only slightly lower than mine. With her whole body covered in pitch-black twin-star supreme battlesuit, Battle Sage and Jing sneered at him and indifferently said, Li Yunmyo, I am not Vega, she still has a merciful heart toward the weak. I don't have any such apprehensions, so if your followers attack me, I will slaughter the entire Lucky Wind City. If Battle Sage Vega was considered a sage in the old meaning of the word which meant a wise person, then Battle Sage and Jing was the complete opposite. She was a thoroughly vicious person. They cancelled each other's power when in one body, but if they were separated, every persona would display their true nature. As Battle Sage and Jing finished speaking, Li Yunmyo's 23 shadows entered caution mode and focused their gazes on the beautiful face of Battle Sage and Jing as if facing their mortal enemy. Compared to other supreme transcending experts, Li Yunmyo's strength could be seen as unrivaled. But there was one problem with that: he had a weakness. Regardless of whether it was Battle God or Battle Sage Vega, all of them considered their subordinates and disciples as chess pieces. If everything was fine, they would put all of their resources to cultivate them, but if necessary, they would discard them without a second thought. But Li Yunmyo was different. He wasn't going to sacrifice everything for the method to reach the deity realm. He cared for his family, friends, and followers, so Battle Sage and Jing's threat struck at his weakness, making it difficult for him to breathe. When he had stepped onto the path of cultivation, his main reason for it was to allow his family to live their days happily. If everyone he cared about died, what meaning would his strength hold? Li Yunmyo didn't dare to even imagine the solitude. If he hadn't cared about Lucky Wind City, he wouldn't have had any reason to separate the shadows from himself. With his strength increased 23 times, how formidable would he become? If he had used his full strength from the beginning, the strike he had landed against Battle God would have more than just pushed him away. Even if he didn't dare to claim that he could have killed Battle God, but seriously injuring him to the point he would lose all his combat effectiveness for a period of time was almost a certainty. At that moment, Dennis, who had been engaged in combat with Battle Sage Vega, took a step back and yelled, "Your distinguished self Li Yunmyo, I say, you are our Fox clan's best and irreplaceable friend, so if you have any problems, feel free to ask for help." After Dennis' words, the 11 battle angels who were originally defending the castle spread their wings and quickly encircled Battle Sage and Jing. Vampires weren't afraid of being massacred. As long as their blood pool had enough strength, any vampire part of the clan could reborn. Therefore, Dennis didn't hesitate to help Li Yunmyu kill Blade Master. Leaving aside the fact that Blade Master's corpse would provide a large amount of energy to the blood pool, his death would pull open the curtain of war in which presently only the supreme experts were participating. The armies would instantly erupt in a large-scale battle which would only finish when one side was completely obliterated. Formidable flesh could quickly increase the strength of a clan. This was why the scene before Lucky Wind City was so beautiful to Dennis he could not put it into words. There was danger in battle, but it was a gamble taken for the future of Fox Clan. The 11 battle angels crowded around Battle Sage and Jing, which caused Blade Master to sink into despair. He didn't dare to believe that Battle Sage Vega could split her body again to bring out another supreme transcending expert. An ordinary Battle Sage would be unable to break the defense of Li Yunmyu's followers. It was a hopeless situation. The sensation of dread rose in the heart of the hegemonic Blade Master. Due to its influence, the blade curtain which was originally very tight began to show faint cracks. Any person with good eyesight could see a tall and sturdy silhouette filled with scars sitting cross-legged behind it. After seeing the figure completely covered in blood, many people subconsciously gulped down their saliva. The disparity in their combat strength terrified them. If they had been placed within such a blade curtain, they would have been instantly sliced into pieces. None of them would have been able to last for this long. Li Yunmyu grinned and nodded toward Dennis for his goodwill before moving toward Blade Master in large strides. Li Yunmyu, your followers are ferocious, but they won't be able to stop me. Battle God bellowed furiously. Upon hearing those words, Li Yunmyu was forced to restrain his killing intent. Chapter 598, Battle Devil Descends. Li Yunmyu's eyebrows jumped, and he turned around with a wooden expression. Battle God, could it be that you want to break your own principle and raise a hand against the weak? Don't tell me that I, Li Yunmyu, have frightened you to this extent, he asked in a gloomy voice. Li Yunmyu had no option but to get serious against Battle God's threat. The 11 battle angels could trap Battle Sage and Jing, but they could definitely not trap Battle God. Also, there might not be much of a disparity between Li Yunmyu's strength and that of his shadows, but without the system reinforcing them, they weren't strong enough. Although they wouldn't be instantly killed, they absolutely wouldn't be able to stop Battle God either. A supreme transcending expert wishing to slaughter a city was a completely absurd thought. Li Yunmyu's shadows were like the battle angels surrounding Battle Sage and Jing. They could stop her, but if the opponent wanted to cause a massacre in Lucky Wind City even at the cost of serious injury, there would be no protecting the weak. Not to mention that Battle God wasn't on the same level as Battle Sage and Jing. Li Yunmyu was convinced that 23 shadows together with quasi-deities reinforcing the spell formations could prevent Battle Sage and Jing from entering in an instant, but if it was Battle God in her place, Li Yunmyu didn't have the least bit of confidence. Battle God brandished the crescent moon halberd and spoke with a malevolent expression. Li Yunmyu, everything is because you encountered me. I will give you two choices now, either you turn around and face me, who is willing to engage in slaughter, or renounce the lives in Lucky Wind City and kill Blade Master. Battle Devil descend. After a ruthless roar, Battle God, who was covered in battle armor, was almost instantly swallowed by black mist. By the time it dispersed, Battle God appeared in front of everyone once more. He didn't seem that different, but his eyes which were originally black and white had turned scarlet. Incredible viciousness and ruthlessness spread out from his body. Li Yunmyu's heart tightened slightly. From the time the black mist dispersed, he couldn't sense the slightest hint of reason in Battle God. There was only the viciousness which had almost materialized as well as boundless desire to massacre. This situation could be said to be extremely familiar to Li Yunmyu. Back in the 7th dimension, when he had used the fiendish energy to shoot arrows, boundless negative emotions had filled his heart, incessantly corrupting his mind. If not for a powerful existence like God undercurrent or the system taking the control of his body at the perfect time, he would have turned into a devil god. He would roam through the seventh dimension and engage in massacre to his heart's content. Compared to Li Yunmu, who couldn't avoid it, Battle God took the initiative to fall into this situation. Moreover, his target was Lucky Wind City. Crazy! Li Yunmu cursed in rage. He had no other option but to abandon Blade Master, who was within his reach, and turn around to face Battle God. Joy spread through Blade Master's face, and the despair which had originally filled his heart slowly dissipated. He once again regained full control of the blade curtain. Endless blade reflections rushed at Zhang Zion, who had just caught a few breaths. A reasonable and calm-headed battle god had no way to resist Li Yunmu, let alone speak of a battle god who had sunken into madness and only desired to slaughter. Blade Master's killing intent toward Zhang Zion rose by another level at that moment. After all, if he couldn't get rid of him in a short time, then how would he be able to resist Li Yunmu after he had settled with Battle God? You will regret this. Zhang Zion stated coldly before he was once again covered by the blade curtain. His intimidating tone and ice-cold eyes brought dread to Blade Master, who strode through the path of hegemony. What sort of existence was Blade Master? He was one of the paramount existences in the 55th Earth. Regardless of how many times the supreme transcending experts changed, Blade Master had been firmly settled as one of the six since the very start. He even possessed treasures which were coveted by the system. But this sort of existence was first frightened by Li Yunmu almost to the point of leaving the battlefield, and shortly afterwards, he was again intimidated by Zhang Zion's threat. The repeated changes in the situation of the battle forced almost all the powers hidden in the surroundings to retreat. They didn't have any first-rate experts like Zhang Zion or Li Yunmu, didn't possess countless resources like the three transcending powers, nor were unafraid of dying like the Fox clan. They had gathered only to see if they could take advantage of the situation and get something for themselves. But once they saw both sides take out their trump cards one after another, they realized how unrealistic their dream had been. With more and more tricks being used by both sides, the majority of powers keenly sensed one fact: this beach's muddy waters shouldn't be disturbed. Li Yunmu had been paying attention to the hidden powers in the surroundings from the start. Only after he sensed their intention to retreat did he shift his full focus on Battle God. After all, this was his home ground in which he couldn't tolerate any accidents. Battle God was dragging the crescent moon halberd with his hand firmly grasping the hilt side of the spear as if it wasn't a halberd but a sharp battle blade which hadn't been revealed yet. As a seasoned warrior, Battle God was proficient with all sorts of weapons to a frightening degree. Two low-pitched roars came from both Li Yunmu and Battle God. Blade energy. Battle God, who was in the crazy devil state, surprisingly used the crescent moon halberd send forth blade energy. It has to be known that because of the limitation of a weapon, if anyone else had used the crescent moon halberd in the same manner as Battle God, they could have only scattered halberd parts over the whole sky. At that moment, by using the crescent moon halberd to release blade energy, Battle God showed that he had already broken through the limitation of the weapon. It was clear that under the crazed devil state, Battle God's combat instincts reached a completely new realm. Heavenly Blade and Pull Blade Cho were used without holding anything back, but this time, Li Yunmu seemed to have completely exhausted his luck. Heavenly Blade didn't trigger the reinforcement of the Golden Dragon, and the blade energy wasn't as rich as the previous time. But with the reinforcement of the system, Li Yunmu had the cultivation of the half-step deity realm. In theoretical terms, he was still more formidable than Battle God. The blade energy from his attack could not be compared to the previous time. Pop! The sound of a bubble bursting echoed, and the two blade energies cancelled each other out without any heaven-shaking movement. The instant the two incomparably terrifying blade energies collided, there wasn't even any deadlock, they just forcibly cancelled each other. Both fighters shared the same amount of limelight in this strike. Chapter 599, Shadow's Punch. Battle God, who had transformed into a crazed devil, suddenly raised the corners of his lips into a sinister smile before even seeing the result of the clash. The next moment, the crescent moon halberd in his hand transformed into a ray of light and rushed toward Li Yunmu. Although the clash of the blade energies hadn't caused any heaven-shaking disasters, the formidable illumination produced by the collision of the two terrifying powers blinded Li Yunmu for a short period of time. As for Battle God, he didn't need reason or senses given his current state. He only had one thought, and it was to kill everyone. What was there to say about loss of sight when even if he lost all his senses, he would use his full power to attack the last known location of the enemy? Li Yunmu, however, wasn't as decisive as Battle God. He had apprehensions, and after losing he lost his sight, he didn't dare to casually attack for the fear of falling into Battle God's pace. Li Yunmu could have never guessed that Battle God who had transformed into a crazed devil would surprisingly be mad enough to lose hold of his own weapon just to inflict a serious injury on him. Whoosh! Suddenly, all the hair on Li Yunmu's body stood up, and without any hesitation, he unleashed his perfect defense for the second time. The crescent moon halberd suddenly appeared in the empty sky and pierced towards the image of the golden bell floating at Li Yunmu's side. After this, it lost all its power and kinetic energy, which resulted in it falling to the ground. By the time Li Yunmu stopped Battle God's halberd, most of his sight had restored. At least he could vaguely see Battle God's location, and he raised his hand and wiped away the cold sweat which covered his forehead. If not for the heightened combat instincts cultivated by him through constant battle, Battle God's halberd probably would have penetrated his tyrannical flesh. How? The moment Battle God discovered that Li Yunmu hadn't died, he howled furiously and pounced on him empty-handed. Li Yunmu was also furious to the extreme. He raised the cyan-colored dragon-headed blade and without the slightest thought of mercy gripped its hilt with both hands before turning in Battle God's direction. If Battle God still had his reason, he would definitely not try to forcefully rush into such a situation. Even if Li Yunmu couldn't use the defense with explosive offense which had stopped his attacks the previous 2 times, Battle God would just be getting injured in exchange for injuring Li Yunmu. As for the comparison between fist and blade, it was quite obvious which would cause more damage. But Battle God at that moment didn't possess the intellect to process such facts. The only thought in his mind was to rush forth and ruthlessly tear apart Li Yunmu's brain. The cyan-colored dragon-headed battle blade easily drew a long bloody line through Battle God's chest when Li Yunmu's strength exploded forth. Even if he couldn't make it really deep, he could still ensure that the wound on Battle God's chest wouldn't heal quickly. The two conflicting energy engaged in a fierce struggle on Battle God's chest. If it had been anyone else in his place, even Li Yunmu, they wouldn't think about continuing this battle of attrition under this sort of suffering. They would rather retreat temporarily and wait for a better opportunity before attacking again. But Li Yunmu underestimated Battle God who had transformed into crazed devil. Thud! A muffled sound of physical bodies colliding echoed, and Li Yunmu's lanky body was blown away. A ruthless palm print slowly appeared on his face, and blood flowed out from his nose and the corner of mouth. Clearly, Battle God was not only unafraid of death, but also didn't think about the burden on his body. Each of his attacks was extremely lethal. Yet as long as Li Yunmu could endure them, Battle God would tire himself to death without anyone's help. You madman! Li Yunmu furiously cursed and prepared to adjust his body to take the initiative to attack Battle God. However, Battle God didn't give him the time. The crazed man appeared by Li Yunmu's side and ruthlessly punched him again. Thump! On this collision, there was an extra sound of something being torn open. As the master of Azure Dragon Expert Armor, Li Yunmu could clearly sense that his helmet had surprisingly shattered from Battle God's 2 punches. But with Li Yunmu's flux energy, this degree of damage could be quickly restored. But this also clearly illustrated the might of Battle God's punch. It has to be known that the main attribute of Azure Dragon Expert Armor was defense. This showed why when the 4 barbarian kings had offered him hegemonic supreme battle suit in exchange for battle barbarian deity suit, Battle God hadn't agreed. After all, the strength of his flesh had already greatly surpassed the strength of barbarians. Thus, Battle Barbarian Supreme Battlesuit which reinforced his strength was the most suitable for him. Fortunately, Battle God didn't have the Battle Barbarian Supreme Battlesuit at that moment, or Li Yunmu wasn't certain he would have been able to resist the might of his punches. But even so, Li Yunmu had become absent-minded for a short time because of the 2 punches. Even the cyan-colored dragon-headed blade silently fell to the ground. Soon, it changed back into its original body of the cyan-colored great snake. The 30-meter-long body was instantly restrained by a group of battle sages and domain sages. But at that moment, not one of them dared to try and kill little Jing. While the winner and the loser of the battle in the sky hadn't been decided, they didn't dare predict the victory of their side. Sow karma today and reap the rewards later. The peak powerhouses restraining little Jing took away Li Yunmu's weapon and provided great assistance to Battle God, but they didn't dare to kill little Jing and thoroughly offend Li Yunmu whose combat strength was off the charts. At that moment, regardless of whether it were the ordinary fluxers, who were paying close attention to the battles, or the supreme transcending experts, who were fighting with their full strength, none of them noticed the 23 mysterious quasi-deities of Lucky Wind City slowly disappear one by one. After the 23 shadows returned, Li Yunmu's consciousness cleared up, and he regained his damaged confidence. His eyes shifted slightly and almost instantly locked on Battle God pouncing at him again. The reinforced strength of Azure Dragon Expert Armor rotated to the extreme, and with the power provided by the system, nearly 7,000 oxen power began to flow through his body. How? In order to release the intense emotion from the terrifying power moving through him, Li Yunmu unleashed a terrifying punch with a loud howl. Chapter 600, Stolen Battle God. With Azure Dragon Expert Armor and the strength provided by the system, the strength of Li Yunmu's each punch was close to 7,000 oxen. The intensity of the punch's power caused almost everyone to feel suffocated, however, even this wasn't his most powerful state. After all, each of his 23 shadows, which had the power nearing 6,000 oxen after systems reinforcement, could fuse with him. If one punch with the strength of 7,000 oxen and 23 punches of 6,000 oxen were combined into one terrifying attack, how frightening would it be? The flesh of Li Yunmu's right hand swelled, and his veins bulged out, looking like they were about to burst. It was clear that they were about to reach the maximum of what they could accommodate. If the power they were carrying was increased by even an ox more, the hand would be unable to sustain this sort of power and would instantly shatter into pieces. Li Yunmu's full strength, of course, wasn't limited to this. However, it surpassed the limit which his body could sustain. It was similar to the time when he had just obtained Flame Thunder energy and didn't dare to use casually at that time because of the weakness of his flesh. The wind from his punch tore through space. Where the wind passed, spatial tiers were torn open, and like that, the terrifying pull caused by Battle God's pouncing figure was restricted. This was absolute power. A power which couldn't be avoided. Before choosing to receiving Li Yunmu's punch, Battle God still had to choose between being pulled or torn apart by the chaotic space. Unfortunately, these two difficult questions were not the least bit difficult for Battle God since he had transformed into a crazed devil. His mind could only grasp a single concept: either he killed Li Yunmu first, or he would get killed himself. Thud. A muffled sound of collision echoed. The next instant, Li Yunmu's fist smashed against something, and his attack containing irresistible momentum stopped with a grunting sound. A close to 3-meter tall shield slowly disintegrated from Li Yunmu's power. To have been able to obstruct Li Yunmu's punch, it was definitely not made of ordinary materials, even if its body seemed to have been made of copper. By the time the large shield's fragments turned into powder from Li Yunmu's punch, Battle God had disappeared without a trace. Yet there was a somewhat rich medicinal smell in the air, which was extremely pungent. When Li Yunmu had carefully studied Meridian Nurturing Flux Point technique, his understanding of medicinal ingredients and herbs might not have reached the level of a great scholar level, but it had definitely reached great master level. In the time he adapted to the pungent smell, he made out the usage of several medicinal ingredients used. After the Dark Age, humanity had begun to frequently use transfer channels. Although they could complete a long-distance journey in a short time, they were extremely unstable. Therefore, many people would be attacked by chaotic spatial streams. Once they got stuck to a wound, it wouldn't heal in a short time unless the spatial energy was eliminated. Medicines to fight that had emerged with time, and in the pungent medicinal smell, an ingredient with that effect was present. Without a conscious thought, a beautiful face floated into Li Yunmu's mind. At that moment, even the other two supreme transcending experts could not assist Battle God, let alone their people. Yet in a moment, he had completely disappeared. It was clear that no supreme evasion technique was used, since at least ghostly evasion couldn't accomplish such a feat. Thus, the only explanation could be that the other party had used spatial evasion. Entering space together with a supreme transcending expert was a burden which surpassed anyone's imagination, not to mention that Battle God had become a crazed devil. He would definitely not agree with the other party, so anyone who tried to get close to him would become his target. Underworld Serpent voice so annoying. Li Yunmu shook his head with a bitter smile as his heart filled with helplessness of not having any say in the matter. Battle God had been on the verge of defeat, forced into dire straits by Li Yunmu, but it wouldn't matter down the line. Underworld Serpent had methods to allow Battle God to break through his bottleneck and successfully become a true deity. It's not spatial evasion technique. They are still in the vicinity, but the system started to say, but then hesitated. Let it be, I cannot be greedy. In any case, you will confront each other later anyway. We will talk when the time comes. Although with his keen senses, Li Yunmu could sense that the system had dug a hole for him, he had no other options. Battle God being rescued by someone made some people happy while others grew worried. Among them, the one most anxious was the person restricting Zhang Zion Blade Master. After all, even after transforming into Crazed Devil, Battle God hadn't been able to suppress Li Yunmu, while now he had completely vanished. With his hands free, Li Yunmu would certainly get rid of him first. Although Blade Master's heart was about to break, he didn't dare to relax his stranglehold on Zhang Zion. He was very clear that with his strength, if he didn't have his treasure obtained in a great serendipity, both Zhang Zion and Li Yunmu could easily kill him. At that moment, even if he renounced his treasure and just fled, he might still not be able to escape from Li Yunmu. His only way out was to stake all he had on strangling Zhang Zion so he could use his treasure to trap Li Yunmu as well. If the situation on Battle Sage Vega's side improved during that time, they might still be able to achieve victory in the day's battle. Li Yunmu lightly snapped his fingers, and the projection of an intense sun arose behind him. Whether it was because it was too close or the oppressive pressure coming from Li Yunmu was too great, the Fluxer standing in the battlefield felt like the projection of the sun was more powerful than the genuine sun in the sky. However, Li Yunmu still wasn't finished. With a crackle, a thunderbolt exploded on the intense sun, and a thunder dragon could be vaguely seen moving about its surface. This youngster dealt with Battle God without using his trump card? Battle Sage Vega, Battle Sage and Jin, and Blade Master felt their breath stop. They did not dare to look at the projection of the intense sun behind Li Yunmu. Given their experience, they could see that it was something which they all craved: divine power. With the system's assistance, Li Yunmu's cultivation might have reached half-step deity level, but he still couldn't utilize divine power. When facing an opponent like Battle God, he was clear in his heart that two battle gods couldn't exist in one world. Thus, one of them had to die. As an expert in body tempering techniques, Li Yunmu had the highest respect for him and chose to fight him head-on. His plan had been to defeat Battle God in the field in which the supreme transcending expert prided himself.